Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's ALTA Insights webinar, How the 2020 Election Results Will Affect the Title Industry. I'm Chris Morton, ALTA's Senior Vice President of Public Affairs, and it's great to be with everybody today. I want to start today by just announcing that our webinar is sponsored by the ALTA Title Action Network. For those of you who are not yet TAN members, I would really encourage you to enroll and help us advocate on behalf of the title profession and industry here in Washington, D.C. and in states nationwide. If you have any questions on TAN and getting more politically involved, we are here to answer them. And Leah Schimpbass on our team here runs those programs, and she'll get into a little bit more detail as it relates to those programs shortly. Also, I'll just say, as we go through the discussion today, we really welcome questions on any of the topics that we cover. You can submit those through the questions box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have today. So with that said, I'm so pleased, as you can see arrayed here, to be here with my tremendous colleagues on ALTA's advocacy team. My teammates really work tirelessly every day on your behalf to represent your interests before policymakers and regulators, and to strengthen our collective voice and impact. So I really want to take a quick moment to welcome each of them. Elizabeth Blosser, our Senior Director of Government Affairs, who expertly leads our state efforts, working closely with our state LTAs and key policy groups within the membership. Steve Gottheim, our Senior Counsel and ALTA veteran, whose substantive guidance is critical to our work across every issue on which we engage. I mentioned Leah Schimpbass, our Director of Grassroots and Political Affairs, who, like me, is a newer member of the team, but who brings years of experience in building strong politically engaged advocates and heads our TIPAC, TAN, and Congressional Liaisons programs. And last but not least, Emily Tryon, our Director of Policy, who leads much of our Hill outreach, relationship building, and federal lobbying efforts, and without whom so much of the advocacy successes that we achieved in 2020, which we'll touch on shortly, would not be possible. So welcome all of you. It's great to see you. I wish we could be in the same room, but this will have to do for today. I'm really grateful to all of you, Elizabeth, Steve, Leah, and Emily, for joining me today, and more importantly, honestly, for the opportunity to work with and learn from each of you every day, day in and day out. So this afternoon, our overarching goals are really twofold: to assess the post-election landscape in Washington and provide our insights on the broader legislative and regulatory policy environment in 2021, and to provide you all with context on what it could mean for our industry and issues. But before we get into the meat of that discussion on our issue set for next year, we want to provide a little table setting on just what we know today in the aftermath of the election about the makeup on the Hill and within the new Biden administration, highlight some of the ALTA advocacy achievements that I just mentioned of this past year, touch briefly on our critical continued political engagement programs and the importance of those within the membership, with all the change that is occurring here in Washington, and just give a quick snapshot of the lame duck session of Congress currently underway. So, what do we know today as we sit here about the environment that awaits come January 20th of next year? The House will continue to be controlled by Democrats, albeit by much slimmer margins than expected, as House Republicans did much better than pundits predicted, setting themselves up potentially to take back the chamber in the 2022 midterms, when a sitting first-term president's party historically loses seats. On the Senate side, the Senate remains up for grabs, with control to be determined by the January Georgia runoffs for the two remaining Senate seats left undecided. If Democrats take both, they will control the chamber, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking any tie votes. If they lose either seat, Republicans will control the chamber, but in either case, slim margins will necessitate compromise if anything significant is to get accomplished legislatively in the upper body. And then finally, Joe Biden is the president-elect and has already begun assembling his administration, as we've seen. He recently announced a number of his economic policy nominees, including Janet Yellen at Treasury, among a handful of others. We can certainly expect an active, consumer-focused legislative and regulatory agenda coming out of the Biden White House, cabinet departments and agencies, including HUD, FHFA, and CFPB. And obviously, we're going to need to introduce ourselves early in the new year to officials in those key seats. So we'll talk more about these dynamics and how they could impact the outcomes on our issues shortly. But I would be remiss if I didn't, again, take a moment to remind everyone listening today of the reason your engagement in ALTA's advocacy really matters and what we were able to collectively achieve this year with all the challenges thrown at us to keep our business and industry not just surviving, but thriving. So to name just a few items, we ensured that title and settlement services were deemed essential and able to remain open and operational under guidance from the Department of Homeland Security. We worked to develop a county recorder operational status tracking system to help ALTA members and state LTAs monitor and troubleshoot local recording problems. We drafted and had a bipartisan federal remote online notarization bill introduced in the House and the Senate, which now has over 80 policymakers signed on as champions and provides a national model for digital closings. We also assisted our members in understanding and accessing the Paycheck Protection Program to provide critical liquidity during the early part of the pandemic and continue to build support for PPP issues, including simplified loan forgiveness and expense deductibility as we move forward. We also heightened awareness of the growing problem of wire transfer fraud by securing language in multiple agency appropriations reports to ensure various agencies are collecting data and reporting their findings to Congress. And in the last week, it looks like any national defense authorization bill that passes at the end of this year will include anti-money laundering language that requires shell companies to report their ownership information to FinCEN to help us potentially reduce the reporting and compliance burden that geographic targeting orders have placed on our industry. So the bottom line is our advocacy matters, as does your role in it. So now, with that as an intro, I'm going to turn it over to Leah to talk a little bit more about the importance of political engagement and her thoughts on the year ahead on that front. So Leah, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you a little bit about TIPAC first. As a lot of you know, it's our political action committee. We contribute to federal candidates, and almost every one of them is an incumbent. We have pretty strict criteria about who we give to. That includes people who are on our relevant committees like financial services in the House and banking in the Senate, leadership, and those who just generally support the title industry. Over the last 2 years, we gave to 110 candidates who were in cycle, and 102 of them won, and we still have Senator Perdue, who we also contributed to, who could potentially win. So that's about a 93% winning percentage, which for those of you not in the political arena, that's pretty high. I know no House incumbent who made it through a primary in the Republican side lost this year, which is tremendous. And a lot of those folks are some of ALTA's biggest champions. In the coming year, we're really hoping to raise even more money for TIPAC and form more relationships with the new members of the Congress and also those on different committees. And that's part of TAN, which is the Title Action Network. I think most of you are probably members, but if you aren't, you can go to tan.org and join. It's free, and we will not bombard you with emails, but we will ask you to take action when we need your help on things like the Secure Notarization Act and other pieces of legislation that we're trying to get passed. So part of our big objectives for the next year is growing TAN, because we need more advocates getting in touch with their members of Congress on the issues that affect us. We also are hoping more people will become congressional liaisons. That's sort of the other side of the coin of TAN. Those are folks who have close relationships with their members of Congress or senators. You know, they're folks you maybe went to college with, they're your neighbors, they're part of your Rotary Club, things like that. And we need to know if that's the case. Later this month, we'll have a survey coming out that we hope everyone will complete. about asking you about your relationships with members of Congress and state legislators. But if you don't have time to take that, feel free to email one of us and say, hey, I know Representative Smith. He lives down the street and our kids play baseball together, something like that. That's a great opening to bring up what you do for a living and how important the title industry is to the economy. And then the other thing, obviously, is TIPAC. As I said, we want to raise more money so we can develop more champions. All of these programs go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. It's just all the advocacy programs run together. And so we hope that more of you will become more engaged in the next year. We've also expanded our outreach on Capitol Hill to different committees now that we're doing more issues that aren't just financial services. The judiciary committees are overseeing things like Brit Action. They're probably going to see some of the wire fraud stuff, as is the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House and the Commerce Committee in the Senate. So it's a whole new set of members that we don't have as strong relationships with, but some of you do. So looking forward to all of our efforts developing new and stronger champions on Capitol Hill. I also know that there are a couple new, there are a lot of new members coming to the Hill, and some of them I think you might be familiar with. Former Representative Pete Sessions from Texas. He was defeated in 2018, ran in a different seat in Texas and won. So he will be back probably on the Financial Services Committee. And I know from Emily that we had a good relationship with him in the past. So hopefully he'll remain a title industry champion. And then if you're from New York, you probably are aware about Andrew Garbarino, who was a member of the Insurance Committee in the State Assembly. I know the New York State LTA has a good relationship with him, so we're hoping he also gets on financial services, and he obviously already understands our issues. There's also 7 new senators so far, and there could be 3 more, the 2 in Georgia, if those seats flip. Also, the California Senate seat that Kamala Harris has right now, somebody will be appointed to fill that. So we have lots of work to do, and we need your help to do more outreach.
Awesome.
Chris,
Thanks, Leah. Absolutely. No, that was a great overview, and I think it can't be sort of overstated the importance of engagement in those relationships with all those new members. So you've been doing an awesome job, and I know that this year is going to be a busy one out of the gate. So thank you for that. Before we get to next year, though, there's just a little matter, obviously, of finishing the outstanding business for the year, including appropriations to fund the government past December 11th, passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and addressed the need for additional COVID relief for individuals, families, and businesses. And I'll say, other than funding the government, there are no guarantees yet that this other business actually gets done. Many of you may have seen, while the NDAA bill is getting closer, there are recent developments that may threaten passage, including things like renaming of military bases and liability protections for tech companies. But the reality is this always has been a bipartisan collaborative bill that usually comes together at the end of the day. So we're hopeful that does in fact happen. On COVID relief, I will say the parties are still far apart on total dollar amounts and the scope of various needs to be addressed, but negotiations have intensified in the last few days. So really we have to stay tuned and stay close on that, which the team is doing. But regardless, I'll say this: we're pushing to ensure that issues like PPP simplified forgiveness and expense deductibility are considered for inclusion in any year-end COVID deal that could come together. There's an outside chance perhaps something like Secure gets bolted, but that may be less and less likely, and we'll talk a little bit more on that. But we're happy, obviously, that the appropriations process has acknowledged the importance for agencies to report wire transfer fraud data to Congress, and certainly that any NDAA bill that passes will ultimately address beneficial ownership challenges. So a lot to be thankful for in terms of outcomes, but also a lot to monitor and continue to press forward through the tape, as they say. So with that, let's jump into the big issues ahead for 2021 now. And I want to ask Elizabeth, Emily, and Steve to talk about our policy prospects and the dynamic ahead that could shape the outcomes based on all of the sort of the table setting we just discussed that we care about. And I want to start with Secure Notarization Act and RON and digital closing sort of more broadly. And I'll ask Elizabeth, you and Emily to kind of walk us through where we are and what we could see in that area.
Yeah, with Secure Notarization Act, I think it's good to just talk a little bit and remind everybody of what Secure does and what it would mean for our industry. So there's three major components to the Secure Notarization Act. One, it allows for nationwide use of remote online notarization, or RON. Secondly, it sets up national minimum standards for the use of RON. And finally, it provides certainty in regards to interstate recognition of RONs. So obviously those three things are really closely related, especially when you're thinking about the national minimum standards. And to remind you, there are three national minimum standards, so it's a little bit narrower than what you would see in state legislation. It is use of multi-factor authentication of the signer, use of tamper-evident technology, and also that audio-video recording of the notarial acknowledgement. Now, it's important to note, if you have a state RON law on the books and it meets all of those three criteria, which pretty much all of them do, then your state law supersedes the federal law that's in place. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing when we're talking about Secure that I think is important to note, especially from the state side, is we do anticipate if Secure is part of any sort of relief package, it will have a sunsetting provision, which means that there will be a certain date and time when the law is no longer in effect. That means that the 31 states that have not yet passed permanent RON legislation should continue their efforts to do so, and really think of Secure as a bridge to get you from this point, hopefully if it passes, to when your state legislature can pass legislation, and your Secretary of State or other regulator can promulgate rules. So I do encourage everybody to keep moving forward. We kind of have a dual state and federal track going here. And with that, Emily, I'll turn it over to you to talk about kind of what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Elizabeth. As Chris had mentioned before, we do have a large number of co-sponsors to the bills that we have introduced both in the House and the Senate. In the House, we have 77 co-sponsors, and in the Senate, we have 5 senators as co-sponsors. They're both bipartisan, which we're very proud of. We continue to meet with a large coalition of industry partners on this issue on a regular basis. Our coalition has grown from the realtors and MBA group that we started with to now we have groups including ACLI, home builders, community bankers, the American Bankers Association. We have a very large coalition of folks that have an interest in this. And we've been bringing that group together on a regular basis to really discuss how we can move the ball forward. We continue to work to get this included in any package, any upcoming COVID relief package, or any other moving piece of legislation that we could kind of add this on. At this time, we don't know what that piece looks like, but we continue that effort, every day, just working to get additional co-sponsors and get that moving. I don't know if you have anything else, Elizabeth, or maybe we should pass it over to Steve. Steve, do you want to talk the next topic, GSEs?
Sure, and thank you, Emily, and always happy to talk about everyone's favorite topic, the government-sponsored entities, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and their overseer, the Federal Housing Finance Agency. You know, over the last 2 years, the tenor here in Washington has been a focus on how do the GSEs get ready to go back to being privatized. It has been a major push from the Trump administration and the current head of the FHFA, Dr. Mark Calabria, who was a speaker of ours at the virtual advocacy summit earlier in May of this year. He had really kind of made a focus of his tenure at the agency to help the GSEs build capital, help them get out of conservatorship, and help them get back to doing the core mission that they were doing prior to 2008, when the United States government took them over. So the big question that everybody in Washington now is focused on when it gets to January 20th is what's going to happen to Dr. Calabria. Like the CFPB, the head of the FHFA is a single director appointed by the president for a set term of 5 years, and is supposed to not be removable except for cause. However, with the CFPB, the decision from the Supreme Court earlier this year, overturning the for cause provision of the CFPB statute, everyone believes that the same will apply to the FHFA. And so the going question is, will the Biden administration allow Dr. Calabria to stay in place, and therefore will he continue down the path he's been going on to privatize the GSEs, or will they let him go? And then what will happen once they let him go? What we do know from a little bit of the Biden housing platform is that he is not, and the Democratic Party are not as supportive of spinning off the GSEs as the Republican Party has been. The main reason for that is, if you are looking to affect housing policy without needing to pass legislation or and you want to use executive actions, the easiest way to do that is with the GSEs under conservatorship. And so that's really going to be a major lever that the incoming administration will have, and expect them to use it as we talk about things like the prohibition on evictions and foreclosure moratorium and how those get extended. There's a lot that the administration can do through the GSEs without having to use Congress or to get a new COVID relief package on those subjects. So we do expect that the GSEs will be a major topic, especially if we see Dr. Calabria removed from office early on in the incoming administration. As I kind of alluded to a little bit, one of the biggest areas that the GSEs have played a major role in this year has been in the administration of this eviction moratorium and the foreclosure moratorium, and providing relief to struggling homeowners. What we do know from those from our conversations with the GSEs is, expect those under the current FHA administration, all of those protections for consumers have been extended on a month-to-month basis. So basically, you don't get much warning about when they're going to go away. They are extended basically about a week or so before they expire. The same is true for the expanded use of powers of attorney that our industry has had the option to use for safe closing practices. Expect that if Dr. Calabria is removed from office, that there might be a longer period of time for some of those types of things to be put in place, and they might get put in place for 6 months at a time as opposed to month by month. So that is the focus on GSEs and housing finance reform. The other area where the GSEs can be a major tool for the incoming administration is going to be on the topic of housing opportunity and affordability. Over the last 2 years, the House Financial Services Committee, led by Maxine Waters as the chairwoman from California, has really made housing affordability a major cornerstone of what that committee is working on, and has pushed a number of pieces of legislation to promote affordability, to improve the amount of affordable housing that is developed, to provide tax incentives to builders and developers to build more affordable housing. And so with the incoming Biden administration, expect for that topic to get an even higher level of importance for that committee. It'll probably be the topic of one of the first few hearings after they do hearings on the foreclosure moratorium. Will be on the topic of affordability, on the topic of housing opportunity. A center point of the Biden housing plan has been this topic of a first-time homeowner down payment tax credit. This is a tax credit similar to the one that was in place from 2008 to 2010, although a little more generous, that would provide a $25,000 tax credit to first-time home buyers to help cover the cost of down payments. Expect that to get a number of hearings at the beginning of the congressional term next year, because of how it's been a major part of the Biden plan. It's also been something that Maxine Waters has talked about. It's also something that in previous Congresses has gotten some Republican support. So there's an opportunity that this could be a bipartisan issue for the incoming administration. For our purposes and for the industry to think about, the studies from 2008 showed that about in the 2-year span that was in place, that tax credit had about 3 million taxpayers that took advantage of it. About 450,000 over a 2-year period that were actually true first-time home buyers that would not have purchased otherwise without the tax credit. So those, that can give you a sense of what a tax credit like that might be able to do for our housing economy, especially as we transition away from a refinance-heavy marketplace as we get rates rising at some point in the near future. The other things to be thinking about with in the affordability bucket, there's likely going to be a big increase in the affordable housing fund is going to be a center point of what the administration talks about. They're going to ask for appropriations on that subject, setting aside money, setting aside low-income housing tax credits, expanding rural housing, all in the name of helping lower income and moderate income Americans buy into home ownership and get the benefits of home ownership. Lastly, the other thing to focus on in the world of housing opportunity is going to be a focus in the racial justice part of the world. And so we do know that a major plank of Maxine Waters' and President-elect Biden's plan is going to be around hearings on exclusionary zoning, redlining, the disparate impact rule, things like the continuing existence in public records of racial covenants. Expect all of those topics to get a higher level of attention in hearings in the first half of next year as the administration attempts to put a focus on issues that have kept minorities from entering the housing market or from having harder times with home ownership than white Americans have had. So those are all things that to be paying attention to and things that are going to get a lot of focus in the incoming year. So with that, let me turn it over to Elizabeth and Emily to start talking about how the administration might actually pay for some of these big proposals that they have around housing.
Yeah, I want to touch real quickly on 1031s, like-kind exchanges. So during the campaign, the Biden campaign came out with a plan for a child care program, which should also encompass elder care. It's got a $775 billion price tag associated with it. And one of the things they're looking at in terms of a revenue source to help cover those costs is rolling back some of the tax breaks on real estate investments. And so based on reporting, we anticipate that will include 1031s. We knew early this past year that 1031s might be something that would be a hot topic in 2021. So to that end, we've been very proactive. We have partnered with other trade associations and a few corporations to commission 2 academic studies on 1031s. These studies are designed to show the economic benefits of 1031s along with all of the various different types of different real estate transfers that they're a part, the different types of real estate deals that use 1031s. We anticipate the data from these studies will be used in press releases in terms of having it available as talking points when we're meeting with legislators and others. And so you all will be seeing more of that come out as we know more about what actual legislation might look like. I do know this is a big issue for those of you who are involved in the commercial network, so we'll be keeping you up to date on any sort of movement in this area. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily and Steve to talk a little bit about CFPB.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. And, we wanted to save everyone's favorite topic for towards the end of our discussion here. So that's why we held off on talking CFPB until now. I think the biggest thing to be paying attention to right now as on CFPB is starting to pay attention to who are the people that are going in for interviews with the president-elect and his team for the directorship. Earlier in the summer, the Supreme Court made the director of the CFPB removable at will, which means that the incoming administration can name their own candidate from day one and have that candidate considered by the Senate. You can probably take a guess on what some of the priorities that the administration are going to put on that new candidate, and what some of the lines that new candidate are going to really draw on if they get confirmed in, especially by looking at the types of rhetoric that's been used and directed towards the current CFPB director, Kathy Kraninger. There's been a big focus over the last few months from Democrats challenging Director Kraninger's moves to reduce the focus on fair lending, reduce the focus on enforcement. And so those are going to be two major issues that I would expect any new incoming CFPB director to reverse almost immediately on coming into office, is the changes to the enforcement office and the changes to the fair lending office. The other major thing to think about is, think about what types of regulations are currently in the works at the CFPB that have gotten a lot of attacking from Democrats on the Hill. Biggest ones that come to mind are the ones on payday lending and that subject. So those are the things that are going to get the more immediate attention versus focuses on new rules or regulations in the mortgage space or on TRID or things like that. In fact, I would venture to guess I wouldn't expect the CFPB to take up anything related to mortgage or TRID next year, with the exception of continuing to work on the update to the qualified mortgage rule that they have to do. But that being said, there is a lot of other areas in which the CFPB may provide some more help and guidance to our industry. So why don't I turn it over to Emily to talk about that?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to mention was, under past directors, we had spent quite a bit of time asking for additional guidance, more clear guidance, and trying to get those tools in place so that we were able to get that information that we needed. And now we do have that. There are additional tools that the Bureau has in order to kind of provide that guidance. The question now just becomes, under a new director in kind of a new CFPB world, if you will they continue to use those tools, and will those additional guidance continue to be provided, or will they revert back to kind of the way things were in the past? So that's something for us to keep our eyes on and kind of see how that moves forward. But I think guidance is something that has been important in the past, and we should keep our eyes on it moving forward.
So with that, Emily, you want to take us into a discussion around cannabis, or one of our favorite topics?
Yes, of course. Many of you may know the House did notice that they will move forward with a vote on the MORE Act. It's Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act this week. I think it's an interesting step forward. It really is a historic step forward on some piece of legislation that decriminalizes marijuana. While it will likely pass in the House, it is not expected to go anywhere in the Senate, but I think it sets us up for what we could expect in this space moving forward. Of course, everything depends on the Senate and what happens in the Georgia races. If the Georgia races flip, I think that something like the MORE Act is potentially going to show up in the Senate and probably move to the Senate floor, and we'll have additional conversations on things like that. But if the Senate stays held by Republicans, that's less likely to happen. Would probably be more likely to see more piecemeal, smaller bills, maybe something like the Safe Banking Act that we had been seeing in the past. One thing of note that I do think is important is from the Republican side, the champion in this space, the main champion was Cory Gardner from Colorado, and he did lose his race. So, that kind of conversation, how that happens, might not be as quick as it would have if the champion was still there pushing things along. So there'll be conversations about this issue. The Biden administration has said that they really want to move toward decriminalization, and they've made that very clear. So the conversations will continue to happen. And so it'll just be interesting to see kind of the makeup of each of the houses and how that really kind of changes what we see moving forward. But it will definitely be exciting. So you have no worries about that. But I think Elizabeth has some more state-specific pieces that she wanted to add that I think are also very important.
So I think if you're picking winners and losers from election, in addition to the winners of the TIPAC supported candidates with a very impressive 90+% win rate there, another big winner was cannabis. Voters in Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and of all places, South Dakota voted to legalize marijuana, and Mississippi voted to allow medical marijuana. So that brings us to 15 states plus the District of Columbia that have legalized the use of cannabis. There's quite a few states that allow for medical marijuana, and there's about 11 states out there that, well, they don't allow for recreational or medical marijuana use. They do allow for CBD and low THC. So as of right now, there are only 3 states that completely ban cannabis products, and that's Nebraska, Kansas, and Idaho. I kind of just provide that lay of the land because I'm wondering what legislative activity we'll see on the state level regarding this issue during 2021. One thing that we know for sure going into state legislative sessions, we may not know how they're going to operate quite yet, but we do know that legislators are going to be facing some budget shortfalls, and they're going to be looking for some revenue sources. And one of those revenue sources could be a tax on something like cannabis. I think that's why you saw a state like South Dakota, that's traditionally very conservative, go ahead and legalize marijuana. It's a great revenue stream for them in a state that doesn't have an income tax. So we'll kind of see how that shapes up on the state side. I know there's already conversations about bills in places like Virginia and Texas moving forward, where a tax like that might be more palatable than other types of taxes to meet budget shortfalls. And I bring this up too because I do think that as more states allow for the use of cannabis products, it puts additional pressure on the federal government to act on this, whether it's through bills like safe banking, which are sort of more piecemeal or a larger package as Emily described. So we'll kind of see how that shapes up. But Emily is right. It's going to be an interesting topic both at the state and federal level moving forward. With that, I'd like to move a little bit into data privacy. I think that's going to be another big topic for us. We've seen over the course of the past several decades, laws related to data security. And now we're hearing more and more about laws related to data privacy. And oftentimes in legislation, the two concepts are combined, but I think it's really important to understand the distinction. And so the little thing I always keep in my mind is data privacy relates to how you use data, and data security relates to how you lose data. And so while we need to keep an eye on data security regulations and laws like the NAIC's cybersecurity law, which is now passed in 11 states and is going to be in some other states this next year, I do want to talk specifically about data privacy laws. Basically, data privacy laws, comprehensive data privacy laws like we're seeing on the state and federal level, give consumers rights as it relates to information about them. So they have rights to ask that you change or update information, delete information, or provide them any information you have about them in a portable format so they can provide it to someone else. Consumers also have rights as it relates to notices and disclosures. And I bring it up because it's important to understand that this is a fundamental change in how we have viewed ownership of data. In the past, if a data aggregator collected a bunch of information, it was their data that they could use as they saw appropriate. Today, under these data privacy laws that we're seeing, I own the data that is about me and associated with me, and I have rights related to that data regardless of where the data lives or who has control of it. So that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. It was the European Union that sort of kicked off this whole data privacy debate with their data privacy regulation known as GDPR. And real shortly after that went into effect, California passed the US's first comprehensive data privacy law known as CCPA. I had anticipated that 2020 was going to be the year of data privacy, that we would see lots of laws, lots of enactments. Obviously, COVID changed that, but that doesn't mean that the issue of data privacy is going away. It is still coming at us. Frankly, another big winner on election night was data privacy with the passage of CPRA, which was a data privacy referendum in California that modifies CCPA and basically makes it very difficult for the state legislature to change the state's data privacy law going forward. The good news from a title perspective is if you're in the industry and you're already complying with CCPA, you're in pretty good shape looking towards CPRA going into effect in 2023. So one of the big things that we pushed as an industry when it comes to data privacy is the idea that entities that are subject to Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which we all are, should be carved out or exempted from these privacy laws so that we don't have a patchwork of rules that we're looking to comply with. We talk a lot about how GLBA has worked effectively for a long time in terms of protecting customers. And so I think we'll continue to have those conversations on the state level, but I do want to talk a little bit about what's happening on the federal level. We have seen a little over half a dozen comprehensive data privacy bills introduced in Congress. And there's three major sticking points on all of these bills when it comes to trying to get consensus between Republicans and Democrats. The first is the idea of federal preemption of all of the state laws on data privacy. The second is exemptions like the GLBA carve-out that I talked about, also is controversial. And finally, inclusion of a private right of action is the other sort of big issue that people talk about. Obviously, these are pretty major points, and they're points that you've maybe even had discussions about in your own state legislature. I know that it's really hard to get consensus. I think what happens on the national level is really going to come down again to those now famous Georgia Senate races. If Democrats take control of the Senate, I think you're more likely to see a national data privacy bill move. I think it'll look a lot like CCPA, but it will provide, CCPA will be kind of the floor, not the ceiling, in terms of what we might see on data privacy. If Republicans maintain control of the Senate and it's kind of status quo, I think we're much less likely to see national data privacy law because it's going to be really hard to get consensus around those three issues that I mentioned. It has been a real struggle thus far in the Senate Commerce Committee, where Senators Wicker and Cantwell have very different approaches to this issue, and I think we would see more of that moving forward. So kind of need a little bit of a crystal ball at this point to know what's going to happen with data privacy, other than to know that it is coming in one shape or form, and it's something to get ready for. We do have a webinar coming up later this month that focuses just on this topic, and I would encourage you to join. The other thing I'd like to mention just real quickly is the issue of redaction or record shielding laws. These are something that we've seen a lot on the state level. And unfortunately, the horrific shooting of Judge Salas's son this summer has made redaction a national issue. Senators Booker and Menendez, who are from New Jersey, where that shooting occurred, have introduced federal legislation that would provide record shielding for judges. We are working very closely with their offices on that legislation, seeking a couple of changes so that we're sure that protected parties don't have trouble buying or selling real estate. The one thing that is pretty exciting is that there is a funding mechanism for compliance for states in the legislation. As you all know, lack of funding on the state level has led to just a huge variation of how implementation looks county to county in a single state. Funding would allow for some standards, some uniformity with implementation, which is good for our industry, and it's also really good for the protected parties. So more to come on that issue as well on the state and federal level. Back over to you, Chris.
Awesome, thanks, Elizabeth. So we have gotten a number of questions that I want to throw out to the team here and tick through some of these because I think they're important, covering a lot of the buckets that you all talked about. Just going back to the NDAA issue and the beneficial ownership question, we had one question that was submitted about that. So I know perhaps we haven't fully digested the deal itself and some of that language, but to the extent you, Emily, and Steve have thoughts on this, the question is, will the items being included in the NDA remove title companies' obligation to file currency transaction reports or anything similar?
So the direct answer to the question would be no, but the longer version of the answer is that the core thing that the provision that we talked about with the NDAA is a version of the Corporate Transparency Act. This is a bill that, for those of you who were with us in 2019 at the 2019 Advocacy Summit, we helped whip some votes for and co-sponsors for. But the core structure of that bill is that it requires corporations, LLCs, and the like to file with FinCEN their beneficial ownership information whenever they form a new company, so that FinCEN has that ability to start doing some tracing when they run into a financial transaction and they see XYZ LLC. That's not the end of a road for them to get information about who are the true people behind those organizations. Beneficial ownership legislation is something that is kind of sweeping the rest of the globe, and so Europe is putting in place similar pieces of legislation this year and next year, and so it is something that is seen as a crucial part of the ongoing fight on money laundering and the like. The reason that we at ALTA started to support this legislation is because of the work that you all do with currency transaction reports and the geographic targeted orders that impact you. Because as we know, oftentimes the only way for you to complete those reports and to fulfill your compliance obligation is to trust the person who's your customer to give you the right information about it, the beneficial owners behind an LLC. And if that customer lies to you, you're the one on the hook. With a beneficial ownership system in place, like what the NDAA will put in place, that gives us an opportunity to reframe the conversation and reframe the burden that's on you as an industry, to start talking with our friends at FinCEN about how do we reduce that burden? How do we say, maybe you don't need the title company to collect beneficial ownership information. You just need the name of the LLC that purchased property, because you, FinCEN, have that data yourself and can match it up. And so we look at it as a way that when it's put in place, we have the opportunity to really potentially shrink the burden that's on you, and also potentially shrink the risk that you all are assuming by completing those geographic targeting order reports like you're doing today. And so that's kind of the hope here. But the reality is the world of anti-money laundering is only going to continue to increase. And so for those of you that are wondering, what's it going to take for the GTOs to go away in general, or when are we no longer have to do currency transaction reports? The answer is probably never. Those are probably always going to be part of what we do. It's just a question of how it's done, because the thirst for government for more information about financial transactions, especially cash real estate transactions, is only growing.
Thanks, Steve. And I think it also highlights, as we get into this new administration, opportunities for these kinds of conversations to take place where we educate or re-educate folks around some of the challenges that we're facing. I want to go back to the housing finance area and bring Emily, you in on this, because Steve mentioned something I think is true, which is, you know, with the Biden administration coming in, the notion of comprehensive housing finance reform happening is less and less likely as they look to use the GSEs for things like expansion of homeownership, housing affordability, housing goals, those kinds of things. But, you know, if we have Senator Toomey as chairman of the banking committee, one of the things he said is that's an issue that he may be looking at. So can you provide some perspective on, you know, what that looks like? Will we still have to play in the dialogue around housing finance reform on the Hill?
Yeah, it's definitely been an issue that Senator Toomey has been focused on historically, and being that he has said that he is not going to run for re-election, he has 2 years. He is the incoming Senate banking chair, so this will be something that he spends a lot of his time focusing on, is expected to be focusing on. He's had a lot of different bills in the past. I think it's something that we need to really focus in on in general. So I think it'll be really interesting. I don't necessarily anticipate it being something that then goes over to the House and the House brings up and gets into law. But the conversations will start at Senate banking again. So I think that we'll have some great conversations over the next 2 years as to what that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a data privacy question. I want to go to Elizabeth, you with one of our members who says, as to data privacy, will the government establish an encryption system that relieves title agents of liability for data losses?
So when it comes to these data security laws, I think we're going to see more and more. Cybercrime is up. It's increasing, and I think that there's going to be innovative technology that helps us address some of those concerns, but I think there's also going to continue to be, both from the state and federal level, onus on businesses to make sure that the information that they have from their consumers is protected in a responsible way, and that there's best practices in place. So I see a continuation of requirements on the cybersecurity front. In fact, the NAIC, in addition to their model cybersecurity law for states to pass, is also starting to focus on drafting some data privacy rules as well. So I anticipate we'll continue to see responsibility for companies to really make sure they're protecting the information that they have.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's we got another one here with some limited time left on CFPB. So I'm going to go back to you, Steve, on that front. Will the CFPB establish national regs so lenders are required to all have the same lending and closing requirements for title agencies? Any thoughts there?
Again, we'll go with the short answer is no. But the longer answer to think about is, we should expect that the Bureau is going to be more active with their enforcement and their supervision around what they see as consumer unfriendly lending and other types of requirements. And so, expect for them to put a little bit more of a light on some of the practices that maybe they are not happy with that we are seeing coming out, in some parts of the marketplace. What I will say is, one area that you might start to expect some of that uniformity, though, that this kind of question is really asking about, is one of the things that even under the Cordray CFPB that the CFPB really took a shining to was focusing on the standards being produced by MISMO, the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization, and they were very big champions at CFPB of using industry to produce some standardization around data around some processes. And what we do know is one of the big items out of the MISMA organization this coming year, or this year, has been the Uniform Closing Instructions Project, led ably by our Government Affairs Committee Chairman, Jim Lamphere. And so I would expect to see the CFPB do a lot more to highlight those topics and really encourage lenders to take a look at things like those new MISMO standards for closing instructions and potentially put them in place. But I don't think that they'll go as far as to mandate it. I don't think they'll go as far as to force every lender in the country to do business the exact same way or to have the exact same stuff in their closing instructions.
So, Leah, I'm going to give you the last word here and call you out for excellent work over the fall. We had a lot of virtual meetings with members of Congress and a lot of our congressional liaisons and others. As we look to Advocacy Summit, as we look to the year ahead, obviously we still have some challenges as it relates to the pandemic, hope on the horizon, but will those virtual sort of opportunities remain a part of what we do in the year ahead, and how can people get engaged in that process?
Well, I think they absolutely will still exist. From what we're hearing, Congress is still not meeting constituents in person on Capitol Hill. So their really only way to talk to people is virtually right now. And as a former Senate scheduler, I say those virtual meetings are fantastic. They really give you a lot of flexibility. You can do it when the member is at home, when he's on travel, when he's in the office. So I think they're really open to it. It's such an easy and convenient way to meet constituents. So my plan is to keep doing virtual meetings as often as possible. It sounds like the winter could be rough for a lot of us, that we might all just be working virtually for a while. So we'll continue to do our advocacy that way. And if there are opportunities, we'll be reaching out to our members. We want to connect as many of you as possible with your own senators or members of Congress so we can get those relationships going.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be essential, and thank you for leading the effort on that. Listen, this has been awesome, a great conversation. I really appreciate all the insights you guys have provided. I think the membership hopefully has taken away some things that they can look forward to in the new year. Obviously, as we get more folks in positions in the new administration and we see the landscape post Georgia runoffs, we'll have other opportunities to sort of get back together and brief the membership on what the lay of the land is at that point. But it's been a great conversation, great afternoon, and as I said at the outset, you guys are a great team, and I am proud to be a part of it. So thanks for letting me spend some time with you this afternoon, and we'll see everybody on the other side when we have more to report. So have a great afternoon and a great rest of your week.